Back in college, I dated this girl named Nicole for a few weeks. She was rather attractive, but unfortunately, that probably caused me to miss some red flags. Nicole was very high-strung, which initially I interpreted as being passionate or competitive. However, one night everything came to a head in a bizarre and frightening experience. To set the scene, it was about a week before Halloween, and we were going to pick out costumes as part of our date. We went to one of those seasonal party stores, and upon walking through the doors, Nicole immediately went to the costume aisle and started scouring the pictures. She was looking for something with fishnet stockings, which I thought would be pretty fun. Things started out lighthearted and exciting, but after not finding what she wanted, Nicole began to get upset. It started small, just a frown creasing her face as she flipped through the costume packages. "I can't believe they don't have any fishnet stockings," she muttered, her voice tight. Initially I didn't realize how mad she was getting, and I tried to keep things upbeat. "Hey, no big deal. There's another store nearby. We'll find something." Nicole gave a curt nod, but her eyes were already narrowing, and I could feel the air between us shift. We hopped in my car and drove to the next spot, a bigger store just a few blocks away. Nicole didn't waste a second, darting to the costume section and tearing through the racks with a kind of frantic energy that made my stomach twist. Still, they didn't have any costumes with fishnet stockings. Her breathing got heavier and she snapped, "Why is this so impossible? It's not that hard." I suggested maybe buying the stockings separately, thinking it was a reasonable fix, but she cut me off. "No, they have to come with the costume. It has to be right." Her tone was sharp, almost accusing, like I'd personally sabotaged her plan. By now I was starting to get uneasy. This wasn't just disappointment, it was something else, something deeper. But I didn't want to be the one to push her over the edge, so I said, "Okay, one more store, we'll get it sorted." She didn't respond, instead she just stared out the window as I drove. The third store was on the edge of town, the kind of place that felt forgotten even with its flickering open sign. It was late, the parking lot nearly empty, and the dim lights inside cast long shadows from the Halloween decorations, fake cobwebs and plastic skeletons that suddenly didn't feel so fake. I was just praying that they had something Nicole would accept. She stormed in ahead of me, and I trailed behind, my nerves buzzing. Nicole rifled through the costumes, her movements jerky, almost desperate. Then when she came up empty again, she lost it. "Why don't you have what I need?" she yelled at the clerk, a timid girl who couldn't have been older than 18. The poor girl stammered, I can check the back," but Nicole wasn't hearing it. "Do it now," she barked. I stepped in, mortified, trying to smooth things over. "Hey, Nicole, let's chill. I'm sorry about this," I said to the clerk, who scurried off. But Nicole wheeled on me, her face flushed and eyes wild. "Don't tell me to chill. You don't get how important this is." I froze. I'd never seen her like this, unhinged, almost feral. The clerk came back empty-handed, and Nicole didn't even wait for an apology. She stormed out, slamming the glass door so hard I thought it'd shatter. I mumbled another sorry and followed her, my heart pounding. In the car, she tried to turn the blame on me. "This is your fault," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "If you'd actually helped, we'd have them by now." I honestly couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Nicole, I've been driving us everywhere. Maybe we should just drop the stockings idea." She cut me off, practically snarling. "No, I need them. You don't understand. I have to have them." Her words sent a chill through me. It wasn't just anger, it was obsession, raw and unfiltered. I had no idea what to say to this, so I stayed quiet as she demanded. "There's one more store across town, take me there." It was past 10 p.m. and I was drained, but her tone left no room for argument. I started the car, the engine's hum the only sound between us. On the drive she went silent, but it wasn't calming. Her hands were balled into fists, her jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscles twitching. I kept my eyes on the road, but I could still feel her presence, like a storm about to break. The fourth store was a rundown strip mall joint, the kind of place you'd avoid after dark. Inside, it was dead quiet except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the rustle of Nicole tearing through costumes again. She yanked packages off hooks indiscriminately, tossing them aside when they didn't fit her vision. A couple of other shoppers even stared, and I wanted nothing else than to disappear. For a brief second, I thought we were saved. Nicole held up a package with fishnet stockings included. I exhaled, ready for this nightmare to end, but then she checked the size and her face fell. "It's too small," she whispered, her voice shaking. "It has to fit perfectly." That was my breaking point. "Nicole, this is insane," I said, louder than I meant to. "It's a costume. Why are you freaking out over this?" She spun toward me, her eyes blazing with something I couldn't name. "You think this is just a costume? You don't care about me at all, do you?" I snapped back. "I've been trying to help you all night, and you're acting like I'm the enemy. You're losing it over stockings." The second I said losing it, I knew I'd crossed a line. Her face twisted with fury. "You think I'm crazy," she screamed, her voice echoing through the empty store. Heads turned, and I felt the walls closing in. "Let's go," I said, grabbing her arm to steer her out. She jerked away, shrieking, "Don't touch me." But then, just as suddenly, she crumpled, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry," she sobbed. "I don't know what's wrong with me. I just need those stockings. Please." I didn't know what to feel, pity, fear, or exhaustion. "We're done for tonight," I said, my voice flat. "I'm taking you home." She nodded, sniffling. We walked to the car in silence. But it wasn't a peaceful silence. It was heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. Halfway to her place, she broke it. "My ex would have found them for me," she said, her voice cold. "He understood me." I gripped the wheel tighter. "Then call him," I shot back, bitterness creeping in. She laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "Maybe I will. He never called me crazy." That was it. I'd had enough. I pulled over on a dark stretch of road, the headlights cutting through the night. "Get out," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through me. "What?" she gasped, like she couldn't believe it. "Get out. We're done." She stared at me, her expression shifting from shock to something darker. Then she smirked. "Fine," she said, stepping out. Before slamming the door, she leaned in close, her eyes glinting in the dashboard light. "You'll regret this. You'll see." She disappeared into the shadows as I peeled away, my hands shaking. Her words stuck with me, looping in my head like a warning I couldn't decode. When I got home, I locked every door and tried to shake it off, but sleep wouldn't come. I kept seeing her face, those wild eyes, and that twisted smirk. A few days later, a package showed up in my apartment. No return address, just my name scrawled in black ink. Inside was a pair of fishnet stockings, pristine and neatly folded, with a note, "You'll always remember me." My stomach dropped. I threw it all in the trash, but the unease lingered. For weeks I couldn't escape it. I'd see fishnet stockings in stores, on strangers, and every time I'd feel a cold prickle down my spine. It was like Nicole was right there, watching me. I never heard from her again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she'd meant what she said. Years later, I still think about that night, how something as simple as a costume turned into a glimpse of something unhinged. It was also something I was lucky to walk away from, because sometimes the real terror hides behind the face you thought you knew. My sophomore year in high school, we were doing mixed media art projects, and our art teacher, Miss Spicer, encouraged each of us to bring in one everyday object from home. I'll be the first to say I'm not the world's greatest artist, and I had like zero idea of what item to pick. While digging around, I found a pair of my old fishnet stockings I used to wear a few years ago, and half as a joke, I decided to use them. Well, fast forward a week or two, and Miss Spicer came up to me after class. She told me that my piece of art really spoke to her, and that she'd entered it in the district-wide art competition. Needless to say, I was stunned, and immediately felt a little bad. As she explained, my artwork would be showcased in the school district office building, and though I didn't have to be present during the competition, eventually I could go pick it up if I wanted it back. I didn't think too much about it at the time. I was just glad I didn't have to stand around at some awkward event, pretending I knew what I was doing with my project. But a few weeks later, after the competition was over, Miss Spicer caught me in the hallway and said my piece was still at the district office. She told me it had won third place, and that I should go pick it up whenever I had the chance. I mumbled something about being busy, but honestly, I was kind of curious to see it again, especially since it had somehow impressed people. So, one Thursday after school, I decided to head over. The district office was this big, outdated building a couple miles from campus, all faded brick and narrow windows. It looked like the kind of place where nothing exciting ever happened, which made me feel a little silly for being nervous about going inside. I walked up to the front desk, where a bored-looking guy in a polo shirt barely glanced at me. "Art project pickup?" I asked. He nodded, slid a clipboard toward me to sign, and handed me a key. "Basement level, storage room B3. Take the stairs down and follow the signs." The stairwell door was heavy, and it slammed shut behind me with a loud clang that made me jump. The air also got colder as I went down, and the lights overhead buzzed like they were on their last legs. At the bottom, I found myself in a long, dimly lit hallway with peeling paint and a faint smell of mildew. Signs jutted out from the walls, B1, B2, B3, but they were old and scratched up, so I had to squint to read them. I started walking, my sneakers squeaking on the linoleum floor, and the deeper I went, the quieter it got. It was like the whole basement was holding its breath. I must have taken a wrong turn somewhere, because after a few minutes I realized I wasn't seeing B3 anymore. The hallway branched off into narrower corridors, and the signs got less helpful, some missing letters, others just blank. My phone had no signal down here, so I couldn't even text anyone to say I was lost. I kept going, figuring I'd stumble across the right room eventually, but the unease was creeping in. The lights also flickered more down here, casting weird shadows that moved when I didn't. Then I heard it, a soft, scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor. I stopped dead, my heart thudding in my ears. It was faint, but it was definitely coming from somewhere ahead. I told myself it was probably just a janitor or pipe settling, but my legs felt heavier as I forced myself to keep moving. The hallway twisted again, and I ended up in front of a door with no sign at all, just a rusted handle and a small, cloudy window set into it. I don't know why, but I decided to look through the window. Maybe I thought I'd see a storage room or someone who could help me. But instead, what I saw made my stomach drop. Beyond the glass was a dark, cavernous space, bigger than any room I'd passed so far. Piles of junk, broken chairs, and old filing cabinets were scattered around, barely visible in the weak light filtering through. And then, near the back, something shifted. It was tall, too tall to be a person, with a shape that didn't make sense. Its body was hunched, skeletal, like it hadn't eaten in years, and its arms hung down past its knees, swaying slightly. I couldn't see its face at first, but as it turned, I caught a glint of something pale and wet where its eyes should have been. And around its legs, tangled and dragging behind it, were fishnet stockings, stretched and torn, stained with something dark that glistened in the dimness. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It didn't seem to see me. Instead, it just stood there, its head tilting slowly, like it was listening. My hands were shaking so bad I almost dropped the key, and then, without thinking, I blinked. When my eyes opened again, it was gone. The room was empty, just shadows and junk, like nothing had ever been there. I turned and ran, not caring which way I was going. My chest burned and my art project was the last thing on my mind. I just needed to get out. Somehow I found the stairs again, pounding up them until I burst back into the lobby. The guy at the desk looked up, frowning. "You okay?" he asked, but I didn't answer. I threw the key on the counter and bolted outside, gulping down the fresh air like I'd been drowning. Needless to say, I never went back for that project. I told Miss Spicer I didn't care about it anymore, and she gave me this weird look, but didn't push. I still don't know what I saw down there. Maybe it was just the dark messing with my head, or maybe it was something real. Maybe it was something tied to those stupid fishnet stockings I dug out of my closet. All I know is that I can't shake the feeling that it's still down there, waiting in that basement, and I'm just glad I didn't stick around to find out. I've been happily married to my husband for almost 10 years now, and occasionally we like to try new things to keep the spark alive. So one night after work a few years ago, I decided to swing by our local mall to pick up a pair of fishnet stockings. I hadn't worn any since my high school and early college days, and thought it could be fun. Our town's mall was old, like it was built in the 60s or 70s. I'm sure it had undergone a renovation or two since then, but you could still see the old architectural and art style in places. It was around 6:30 p.m. when I pulled into the parking lot. The sun had already dipped below the horizon, leaving the sky a dull gray. The lot was sparsely populated, only a handful of cars scattered near the entrance. I grabbed my purse and headed inside, the automatic doors wheezing open with a tired groan. The air hit me with that familiar mall smell, a mix of stale popcorn and synthetic air freshener. The lights buzzed faintly overhead, casting a sterile glow over the polished floors. My plan was simple: find a store that sold fishnet stockings, maybe a boutique or one of those trendy accessory shops, and get out. I figured it wouldn't take more than 20 minutes. The mall wasn't busy, which made sense for a Tuesday night, and that helped. A few stragglers wandered past, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. I spotted an escalator ahead and rode it up to the second floor, where I vaguely remembered seeing a store that might have what I needed. When I stepped off, though, something felt off. The second floor was quieter than the first, almost silent except for the hum of the lights. The stores I passed looked dated, with faded signs and half-empty displays. I kept walking, scanning for anything familiar, but the deeper I went, the more deserted it felt. A jewelry kiosk sat abandoned in the middle of the walkway, its glass case smudged and empty. I glanced behind me. The escalator was still there, but it seemed further away than it should have been. I reached the spot where I thought the store should be, but instead of a boutique, there was a shuttered storefront, its metal gate locked tight. A handwritten sign taped to it read, "Closed for renovations," though the dust on the gate suggested it had been that way for years. I frowned, pulling out my phone to check the time, and noticed there was no signal. I guess it made sense in an old building like this. I just have to find another store, or an exit, and call it a night. I turned down a hallway I hadn't noticed before, figuring it might loop back to the main area. The tiles here were cracked, some missing entirely, and the walls were lined with peeling paint. The fluorescent lights flickered more aggressively, throwing jagged shadows across the floor. I told myself it was just poor upkeep, nothing to worry about, but my pace quickened anyway. That's when I heard it, a low, rhythmic tapping, like someone knocking on glass. I stopped, my breath catching in my throat. The sound was faint, coming from somewhere ahead. I strained to listen, but it stopped as suddenly as it started. Probably just a loose pipe or something, I reasoned. Still, I didn't like it, and I kept moving, hoping to find a directory or an exit sign. Unfortunately, the hallway just stretched on, bending slightly to the left. Eventually the tapping came back, louder this time, and closer. I spun around, expecting to see someone, anyone, but the corridor behind me was completely empty. My chest tightened. I started walking faster, then jogging, the sound of my shoes slapping the tiles drowning out the tapping for a moment. But when I stopped to catch my breath, it was there again, now joined by a faint whisper, like voices too soft to make out. I couldn't tell if they were coming from the walls or my own head. The hallway also didn't make sense anymore. It twisted and turned in ways that defied logic, leading me past the same shuttered storefronts over and over. However, the sign seemed to change each time I passed. One minute it was closed for renovations, and the next it was out of business. Then there was just a blank slate of rusted metal. The lights dimmed, taking on a sickly yellow hue, and the air grew heavy, almost suffocating. I broke into a run, desperate to find a way out. The corridor narrowed, the walls pressing in until my shoulders brushed against them. I stumbled into a wider section and froze. Ahead was a glass door, its surface smeared with grime. Beyond it, I could see another hallway, but it didn't look right. The perspective was off, like the floor slanted upward into nothingness. I pushed the door anyway, needing any escape from this maze. The new corridor was worse. The ceiling was low, forcing me to hunch, and the walls were bare concrete, cold at the touch. The lights here didn't flicker. Instead, they pulsed, slow and deliberate, like a heartbeat. My phone was useless, the screen frozen on a blank signal bar. I kept moving, though every step felt like wading through mud. The whispers were louder now too, overlapping into a dull roar that made my head throb. Then I saw it, a shadow at the end of the hall. It was tall, too tall, its edges blurred like smoke. It didn't move, instead it just stood there, blocking the way forward. I backed up, my heart hammering, and the shadow tilted its head, or what I assumed was its head. I turned and ran the other way, not caring where I ended up as long as I wasn't near that thing. The corridor twisted again, and suddenly I was somewhere new, a service area maybe. There were stacks of cardboard boxes, a rusted cart, and a single flickering exit sign pointing right. I followed it, half expecting the shadow to reappear, but nothing came. The air lightened, and the whispers faded as I pushed through a heavy door and spilled out into the parking lot. The night air hit me like a slap, cold and sharp. I doubled over, gasping, and checked my phone. It was 6:50 p.m. Only 20 minutes had passed. That couldn't be right. It had felt like hours. My car was still where I left it, untouched. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there, staring at the mall's dark silhouette. The entrance looked normal now, inviting even, but I wasn't fooled. I drove home empty-handed, my hands trembling on the wheel. When my husband asked how it went, I mumbled something about the store being closed and changed the subject. There's no way I could tell him the truth. How do you explain being trapped in a place that shouldn't exist? Even now, I avoid that mall. Sometimes, when it's quiet, I swear I hear that tapping again. I hear the faint and distant noise, like it's waiting for me to come back.